I was brought on in 2013 to run their zero waste program to help businesses meet both the public demand as well as their supply chain demand of going zero waste. As we went through the process, we realized that a lot of food manufacturers, both due to their internal goals at corporate, but also their supply chain, were expected to have a sustainability plan, an energy management plan, just a whole slew of plans and actions that not everybody was ready for. So we retransitioned our program into help individual facilities communicate both with their internal corporate stream as well as their supply chain. And if you think about that for a minute, and all the presentations before me and after me will talk about components that save you money and save you resources and make your process more efficient. The problem sometimes is, and I am fully cognizant of that, of where I stand, if you've never been in a manufacturing facility, it's hard to transition and translate those things into nice, pretty charts and graphs, right? Or a good story. IMEC will talk about reorganizing your product line or your process line to be more efficient, right? Instead of building everything together or move all at once. And Rick's the professional here, so he'll talk about that. But the idea that saving 10 minutes in your process line has a sustainability component, the rest of us understand it's taking that understanding and translating that for a corporate annual report or communicating that with your supply chain, saying this is how we think our process looks more sustainable. And so that's what I'll be covering a little bit today, and I'll end with an actual case study of how we did that for a small manufacturing facility. So what we're going to talk about is why, where to start the process in the case study. I just said that. So why? Why have a sustainability plan or a sustainability program or a green team, however you want to rebrand that internally? Sometimes it's management strategies, management requirements. My dad runs a manufacturing facility in India. And every time he goes for a golf outing, his staff hates it, right? Because he comes up with a new idea he heard somebody else had, and now it's got to work in his plant. So that's something that I know a lot of people deal with is because management said so, now we have to do it. And that doesn't usually translate well if there isn't a clear understanding of why. Sometimes there's self-initiated internal champions. Mike and Dan and everybody who does technical assistance can attest that sometimes the best people to get stuff done is someone in the organization that's really passionate, really cares, and knows the business intimately. The third one is the one I'll be talking about a lot today, is supply chain reporting. We're all part of some kind of supply chain, and somewhere in that supply chain, someone wants you to go zero waste, net energy positive, reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what we're seeing, not just in the Chicagoland area, but across the state. That's why most manufacturers, especially in the food and beverage industry, are into greening their supply chain. And the last one is public relations and branding. That's the obvious one, I think. So, so the why. If you look at that, that's 2008. These are companies within the largest publicly traded organizations that have had to report their sustainability efforts, not to their public, not to their customers, to their supply chain. So this is a large company asking a smaller business to report their green or sustainability efforts. As you can see, that it's almost doubled every year, and this is just a 10-year period. The orange signifies a certain standard, that all of these have the same standard, whereas the white is anything you can come up with. And we've seen some ridiculous sheets of paper of, tell me your green standards, here are the standards we've come up with, they're different from our other supplier. So if you're a contract manufacturer that has multiple suppliers, or if you're a factory that does multiple products, it can get somewhat hairy. But the idea is that it's coming and it's growing as fast as it can. And if you're wondering why, if you're a tertiary business, so let's say you're a large multinational company that sells directly to the customer and you've made your goal to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, but you buy most of your product from someone else, your actual emissions are probably somewhere else. So for the food and beverage industry, it's about 5.9 is the ratio. So for every one emission that comes out of your operation, 5.9 come from the supply chain. So it does make logical sense for them to focus their energy across their supply chain. Now, if you're a retailer that sells food and beverage, that's 10.9, right? So if you're a grocer and you're trying to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, you could put all the new lighting, can do all the emissions reductions within your footprint, but a lot of your emissions are coming from your supply chain. And so that's their incentive. I want to be cognizant that their other incentive is cost reduction. I mean, this is all great and well, but another incentive of going sustainable across your supply chain is the idea that there are cost savings to be made, and those then get rolled up to the tertiary consumer. Does everybody know how this works, what greenhouse gas emissions are, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions look like? Show of hands, no. I'm happy to go over them real quick. So scope 1 emissions are emissions that happen in your facility. So your lights, your processes, these are things that you have control over as your facility. Scope 2 are how you purchase your electricity, your energy, sometimes your gas. So these are emissions that Ameren holds for you, right? The cost of providing you that electricity. And the scope 3 is your supply chain, so where you get your ingredients, your packaging, your consumables. Every year that Ameren or ComEd increases their renewable portfolio, which they do diligently every year, that reduces your scope 2 emissions. So you benefit from their greening. If your suppliers improve their process, you benefit from that. And then these are the things that Mike, Dan, Tim, and Rick are going to talk about how to improve that scope 1 emissions. Scope 3 also includes your waste and how you deliver your product. But so if this is your process, if you're selling to another business, you fall into their scope 3 emissions, right? So if you think of a larger organization that's buying your product, this is their direct, you fall in their tertiary. And like we said, if you're a retailer, 10 times of those emissions are in that scope 3 for them, which is the food and beverage industry. So that's the incentive for them. I'd like to switch gears on how to start a green team. This sounds incredibly, wow. Didn't track well, I guess. That's baseline, that's celebrate, that's evaluate, and that's implement. But that's the process, right? You baseline, you identify, you implement, track, evaluate, report, and celebrate. I want to go over the baselining portion because everybody else today will talk about how do you identify, how do you implement, and then how you track. How you evaluate and report is an internal process, and how you celebrate is important, but it's something you decide, right? So I want to go over baseline. When you start a green team or you're reevaluating your green team, the one thing you do want to do is baseline. You can't really report successes if you don't know where you're starting from. And when you are baselining, people tend to baseline numbers. And that's important. You probably want to do that. But what you don't baseline often is staff capacity and current activities and past activities. People in your office were hired to do something specific, but they probably are interested and can do a lot more things. So if you baseline your staff's abilities, you can avoid the need of finding talent elsewhere and make people feel better. An example for me is I really like designing, but I wasn't hired to do that. But over years, they found that out, and I do some of the designing for fun. But current activities is, say you have a decentralized operation, your maintenance person already does lighting upgrades and it's never been recorded. Having that recorded and documented helps you move forward. And let's go over an example of baselining because it gets tricky sometimes. Let's say you baselined your energy usage. from 2016 to 2018, if you don't baseline your production units, it's really hard to know if you've become more efficient. So let's say in 2016, you used less energy than 2018, but your production went down. You actually didn't save anything, right? Or the opposite, which is more likely what happens, is from 2016 to 2018, you've done a lot of energy upgrades, a lot of efficiency, but your production almost doubled. So when you look at raw numbers, you're like, okay, why am I not seeing anything? It's because you probably haven't normalized it, and it's easy to normalize only if you start off with a good baseline data. If you can normalize usage, production, full-time equivalent, anything that you have numbers for, like how many people work there, because if that changes over time, it's easier to normalize that. So when you put usage by production, now we can see that by your baseline, your kilowatt hours per unit reduced significantly. This is not real data. This is just randomized data that I came up with. In my assumptions, it's a 30% reduction, right? But if you just look at usage, it's a 10% reduction. The real reduction came in efficiencies that made more product for the same kilowatt hour. Now that translates into greenhouse gas emissions reduced, but also translates into dollars saved and your cost per unit going down. And that's one of the strategies when you're picking winners. When you have people come in and identify opportunities, there's going to be a lot of opportunities they identify. And sometimes when you've baselined your staff, you realize you just don't have that kind of time. You've got to prioritize what happens where. You have the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 options. This is really easy. This is not really complicated stuff, right? But by putting it in something like this, allows you to have conversations both internally as well as with external audiences. If someone says, hey, we really need to upgrade all of your motors, and you're like, yes, makes sense. It's on our phase 2, needs a little higher investment. We just don't have that right now, but we have a ton of low-hanging fruit that we're going to go after. And then we go to phase 3 once that gets taken care of. What this also lets you do is capitalize on the savings. So the savings from phase 1, you can then move to phase 2 and then move to phase 3. It also lets you put a never list. So never right now is a good list to have because a lot of people come in. The example I use is we're working with the city, and the city staff wanted to start recycling pens across the city. So all the pens you have, they wanted to create a recycling program for pens, which is just really hard to do, really high investment, difficulty is high, and the impact is low because pens are light, they're not easy to recover. So you can say if you have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, it's like, yeah, that's great. It's probably going to be in phase 4. It's hard to do. But then you have the ability to have that conversation without sounding dismissive. Reporting progress and sharing successes is important. Most of us go to facilities and people just don't share successes or don't have realistic targets. It's just hard to have realistic targets and reporting successes if you haven't baselined or identified. So if you have baselined well and identified good opportunities, it's easy to do some of these things. So, any questions before I go to a case study? No. Yes, Tim.
I would just like to make the comment that I think it would be a good strategy to have as a first step having management agree to economic criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And that should include things like life cycle costing. Establish within the sustainability group an energy investment policy first.
Sure. And if you're large enough to have that conversation, that's great. Sometimes smaller manufacturing facilities are given the edict from their supplier. So they're told, if you want to continue doing work with us, you've got to reduce your energy by 30%, your water consumption by 40%, and your greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. And that really helps that conversation because then you're like, okay, how important is this client? And then you are able to re-qualify your goals. Which is the example here is This is a 12-person manufacturing facility. Their sustainability team is led by their receptionist, who is also their web designer, who also happens to do their safety. So as you can see, she has all the time in the world to do this. But their goals were really simple too. They had to start tracking scope 1 and 2 emissions. They had to reduce their utility usage by 20% and achieve zero waste by the end of the fiscal year. So easy targets, lots of staff ability, and understandable goals would be easy here, but that's not what they had to deal with. They had never heard of scope 1 or 2 emissions before this, considering their core business was making food products, right? That's their work, they do it well, which is why they have a client. This client was important enough for them to take seriously, which is why they entertained that idea, and they were. So what we came in to do was identify their scope 1 and 2 emissions, help them through that process, give them the ability to do this on their own in the future, and achieve zero waste for them. Part of that was conducting a waste audit at their facility, identifying what their opportunities were, both in way to diversion, but also to find replacements for the stuff that isn't recyclable. Sometimes there are products and processes that can just eliminate that waste in generating it from the first place, either by talking to your supplier or making sure your process changes a bit. And we moved things that can get recycled to higher, and we added a composting program for them. That was the easy part. The hard part was tracking emissions and identifying utility usage reductions. But we were able to do that. Our scope 1 emissions by the end of last year, so they have until 2019 to get to their goal. The end of 2017, they were able to reduce their total emissions by 9%, their electricity usage by 37%. We had a colder year, so that's 10% increase. Their water usage reduced by 32%, and their waste reduced by 56%. This was easy for them to do once they figured out what they were doing, operationalize that within their departments, and I don't have to be there anymore, which is exciting for me, because they now have the internal skill sets distributed across their own offices that they can do that. So that's what we do and how we relate to the rest of the group. If you're having your suppliers require you to do any specific sustainability work, or you've engaged some of the other folks who make presentations today, and you're wondering how you can translate that into your sustainability program, communicate better with your corporate sustainability team or your suppliers, feel free to reach out to me. But otherwise, I can take questions. If you have materials you want to recycle that you need to bounce off, happy to take them. Yes?
Just a comment about Shanu. I saw this program about 3 months ago, and I'm in and out of a lot of different companies and businesses. And what occurred to me, after listening to him, a lot of these places we work with and go into, they're actually doing some sustainability exercises that they're actually doing. They don't realize they're doing it, which is the benefit of Shanu, to come in and actually explain to them what they're doing and actually build on it and put some structure around what they're doing. It's really, I think, more of a benefit out of it than what they realize that they're actually doing at this point in time.
Yeah, and I don't mean to sound like I don't do my job well, but that's usually what I do, is I go in and I realize you've already done everything. You just need someone to rebrand it for you in a way that makes sense to the general public. And sometimes it is that. It's my favorite sentence is, well, that made sense to me and that's why I did it. It's like, that is great. Can you say it was because you wanted to be greener? Great, we'll make that happen. But sometimes it's just like, hey, that was, cleaning products is a good example, right? I didn't want to get that smell in my clothes every day, so I turned to a smell greener product. I didn't ask anybody, it was cheaper, it just worked. If there was a formalized process around that, it would have been easier to communicate with staff. It's also easier to find opportunities that way when everybody knows clearly what you define, and like Tim was saying, what you define sustainability as an organization. And that usually takes a meeting where everyone's sitting together and it's quick and easy. Because then you're able to communicate with Ameren better too. Say, hey, Ameren, here's our goal. Here's how much we really want to get to. Can you help me find those incentives and find those energy or utility savings? Because then they know what your appetite is and how serious you are, and it makes their lives a little better too. I don't want to speak for them, but I'm just assuming that would work for you, right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. It works the same way with ComEd in my region. If you go to ComEd and say, look, got to reduce 20% by this year, can you come up with a plan for me that helps me work that out? It's really easy for them to go through that process.
And I'm starting to hear more larger companies talking about the supply chain, where the plant is supplying product to the manufacturers, say, of automobiles.
Mm-hmm.
And they're starting to require
Right.
more looking into whether you're greener, your ISO 50001, those kind of things. And plants are doing things already to move towards what they need to do. I'm starting to hear about that more and more.
The two things I would like to leave you with is, if you haven't picked a baseline year, pick one that makes sense. And if you've not set up a green team yet or some kind of continuous improvement team, make sure you have somebody from every department. And I mean every department. I'm also like the cleaning crew, have someone there, because sometimes you have an idea that works for 4 groups, but the one group it doesn't work for, turns out owns all the responsibility, and that's hard to implement. But again, if you need just to bounce off ideas, happy to do so.
And try to, those teams try to have more than one person sharing the lead responsibilities, because in this day and age, you all know that people come and go. So it's nice to at least have a backup there if the lead person leaves. I've had it happen a few times.
Well, thank you so much.